in terms of time. So this is why, without further ado, let's dive right into the next topic, which is, of course, pandemics and war when anti-Semitism turns to lethal violence. I've seen him here, Gadi. I've seen him here on stage. Armin Laschet, I don't know if he's in the room right now. You're calling him as it is. For the time being, it's my great pleasure to welcome on stage the Director of International Jewish Affairs at the AJC. He's also a personal representative of the OSCE and the Chairperson-in-Office on combating anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rabbi Andrew Baker is here. Also with us is the Federal Government Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. Felix Klein is here, ladies and gentlemen. Please give him a warm welcome. Please have a seat. He's, of course, Professor of Security Studies at the Department of War Studies at King's College and the Director of the Institute for Freedom of Faith and Security in Europe. Peter Neumann, please give him a warm welcome. Peter Neumann is with us here, and yes, delighted to have with us, of course, German MP, the former Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, and the Chancellor candidate, Armin Laschet, of course. He's here with us. Welcome, Armin Laschet. Please give him a... Please have a seat. Hello. Good to see you. Indeed, pandemics and war when anti-Semitism turns to lethal violence. How to secure Jewish communities around the world. That is the topic, of course, Armin Laschet, that we are talking about. And if we're looking at 2021, just to highlight this one, it was not a good year. Synagogues were vandalized, Israeli flags burned, online threats surged, rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories during the pandemic as well. How do you assess the situation right now as we speak, 2022? How do you see the Jewish communities around the world and in Europe in particular as far as the security situation is concerned?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very interesting issue to see. There is a crisis, there is a pandemic, and people react anti-Semitic. If there is any problem in the world, a group of people say, these are the Jews. Or use frames of anti-Semitic. Or play like they were victims with this yellow star. The Minister President Söder mentioned it. And this was a difficult situation 2020, 21, but I think there was a big solidarity in the Western societies towards the Jewish community, stronger than in other cases. Because the mixture of the people who were against the rules during the pandemic were others than usually are against Jews. This was a strange mixture which was demonstrating and which was in favor of strict rules. This is one thing. So we had the incidents, but we had a big solidarity. Therefore, your question, 2022, security of Jewish communities, it's in Europe, so far as I can see, good. Because there was no attacks from this anti-Semitic, but we have to be careful. It could be changed at any day. Now we have the war. Nobody knows whether somebody comes with a theory, these are the Jews, or something like this. We have to be very careful. There was a discussion about the Süddeutsche Zeitung, who had a caricature, what is the English word for?
A caricature of Zelensky, yeah.
Yes, and some people said he's looking like a typical Jew. He was on the screen. The whole Davos forum was sitting there, and there was a debate in Germany. Is this right? Is it necessary to show him with some probably typical things. So be careful, yes. Security problems in the moment, no.
Rabbi Andrew Baker, unfortunately, anti-Semitism and hate crime has been on the rise in the EU, both digitally, but unfortunately also physically. And we're here to discuss how to increase the protection of Jewish life in Europe. What do you expect from Europe? What do you expect from European leaders?
You know, I think we need to see this as a kind of arc looking back even 15 years. Because at the time we saw a increase in incidents of anti-Semitism, but governments unaware, ignorant, even deflecting any sense of responsibility. So over this time, much has happened that is positive. Recognizing the seriousness of these crimes, of lethal attacks on Jewish targets, and that governments bear a responsibility. Mind you, early on, many governments didn't even have the ability to identify and record hate crimes, so it was as though these events never took place. More and more now, governments have made commitments to collect data so we know what is happening. And in turn, governments are being pressed to take action. That means to provide extra security for communities, funding to assist in hardening synagogues, schools, and other institutions, and at the same time, Jewish communities themselves recognizing that they must play an active role. They need to train themselves to know what to do in times of crisis. Much of this wasn't there even a decade ago. So if we look now, we can at least see that building blocks are in place. It has not meant that the problem has gone away, and at times it doesn't even feel like it's diminished. But there is a much greater sense today than we had, again, a decade ago. The problem is real, but governments have a responsibility. I would add that it was only in 2013 that we had a clear examination of what Jews in Europe perceived and experienced in the area of anti-Semitism. The EU Agency for Fundamental Rights conducted a first survey, and what was significant, perhaps it didn't tell Jews something new, but it told governments and the larger population in Europe something I think they were unaware of, where a third of European Jews said they would not, in public, wear something to identify themselves as being Jewish, out of fear for harassment or attack. I think once we put these things clearly in place and have actual numbers and percentages, it meant governments needed to pay attention. And I think we've seen that now as a result in more and more places, commitments taking place.
Felix Klein, the situation is real, the threat is real, and governments have a responsibility here, says Rabbi Baker. You, of course, as the federal government's commissioner for Jewish life in Germany and in charge of the fight against anti-Semitism, this responsibility clearly must weigh heavily.
Of course, I mean the government. Any government has the responsibility to secure security for its citizens. Of course, that's obvious. So in Germany and in every country, the first thing is to ensure that the legal situation is sufficient. Saying that when we talk about anti-Semitism and when it is a crime, that it will be punished quickly and that means that also the judiciary and police forces are able to discern anti-Semitism and that prosecution takes place. So when we talk about what Armin Laschet said in the pandemic, and I agree to your analysis, people are much more vulnerable to irrational so-called explanations, conspiracy theories. And we have seen these terrible things, people wearing yellow stars in manifestations against the corona measures. And distortion and denial of Holocaust has been a crime in Germany for many years. Fortunately, now it is punished. Prosecutors are taking the lead. Also, the burning of flags, foreign flags, has been made a crime last year. Was one of my suggestions, actually. And now we have really cases where people who burnt Israeli flags last year in May in North Rhine-Westphalia, they are getting charged. And so this is what the government has to ensure. Of course, we have to respect the judiciary. It is independent, of course. We have to increase the sensitivity within police forces and the courts to deal with anti-Semitism. So I think on the legal side we are in Germany at least on a quite satisfactory position, but we have to enhance the implementation, and that means training measures. That means the adoption of the IRA working definition. Mr. Söder said that the Bavarian government did so it needs to be trained in police education, etc. And I think we are on a good track in Germany to get grip of that form of anti-Semitism.
We're on a good track in Germany, says Felix Klein, echoing what Armin Laschet was saying. Peter Neumann, you're an internationally recognized expert when it comes to terrorism, when it comes to extremism. From where you're sitting, what is your assessment and evaluation when it comes to the security of Jewish communities around the world, but in Europe in particular?
So I think when you deal with extremism, inevitably you have to learn about anti-Semitism, because whatever type of extremism you're talking about, almost all of them vilify Jews, whether it's right-wing extremists, whether it's Islamists, even left-wing extremists to some extent. And we've of course seen over the past decades even that Jews have always been the canaries in the coal mine. Wherever Jews were attacked, it typically indicated that a new form of extremism was rising, and that more profoundly perhaps something was wrong with society. 10 years ago, we had the awful attacks in Toulouse on the Jewish school kids. 7 years ago, we had the attack on the kosher supermarket. 8 years ago, we had the attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels, which, by the way, was the first attack of ISIS in Europe. So all the other attacks by ISIS, whether in Brussels or Paris or Berlin or Barcelona, they came after that. It started with the attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels. And so all of that indicates that whenever something happens to Jews, whether you are concerned about Jews or not, you should be concerned about society, because typically that's the first indicator of something going wrong. And of course, I am concerned about what we've seen during the pandemic. In fact, our center, IFFSE, the Institute for Freedom of Faith and Security in Europe, last year did a survey where we looked at anti-Semitic narratives in the context of the pandemic. And we've seen more than ever, really. And if you follow Minister President Söder in what he said, which is that it starts with thoughts, it turns into words, and then finally it turns into actions, there are a lot of anti-Semitic words on the internet right now in the context of the pandemic. And whilst many of them will never turn into actions, we do have to be concerned about that, because there's more anti-Semitic propaganda and rhetoric out there than I have ever seen in my history of dealing with extremism.
It's quite concerning what we are hearing, Armin Laschet, particularly about the hatred that is being spewed online, digitally, the anti-Semitism that is being spread. And it always brings with it the call on the part of the people. They're saying the politicians have to take tougher actions against the social media platforms, the internet providers, to combat digital hatred and extremism. Are we doing a good job?
We could do a better job. I think the rule is clear that the same law is in the internet than in the real world. Some people said internet is free. There are no rules. This is the idea of internet. But today, every political party, every ministry says the same rules in internet than in normal life. This is good. Second, the big companies are working for themselves to remove hatred, anti-Semitism, glorification of violence or whatever. This is good. But the use of the legal possibilities could be better. We had in Germany, there you saw this. In Germany is a the Böhmermann show.
Yeah, it's a late night. It's a late night talk show.
Something like that. And they tried to go to 16 police stations all over Germany, in every federal state, and to ask, this is Nazism, this is anti-Semitism, I want to accuse it. And this was terrible, what was the reaction. In a lot of states, the police said, no, this is internet, we don't do it, we are not able to find the people who did it. And in 1 or 2 states, they were active.
Right.
Today, the states are searching which police station did it, and they accuse the policeman because of not fighting anti-Semitism or anti-Nazi, Nazi propaganda.
Yeah.
And I think this is an awakening signal that the institutions know we have to act when somebody comes to a police station and say there is an anti-Semitic.
Indeed, that study that you refer to, the lack of earnesty, perhaps, on the part of some states in dealing with hate crime is troubling indeed.
It's interesting. In the other, I don't know whether you know it, whether in other European states there is a better situation than in Germany. In Germany, this was disastrous.
Peter, where does Germany stand?
We do have different types of law in Germany. A few years ago, we started having this. It was called NetzDG, this new law that basically puts a lot of burden on on platforms and internet service providers to actually make sure their platforms are free of hatred. And I think in general, whilst that law hasn't been fully implemented, in theory, it provided a good way of dealing with it. It's all about the implementation, and I think generally the principle is right, which is that companies like Facebook, which are big and powerful, have a lot of resources, should actually care about this. And the state and governments have to, if necessary, force them to care about it. And they should be the ones who, in the first instance, make sure that content like that doesn't stay up for a very long time. Because of the volume that is on the internet, unfortunately, it is difficult for state authorities to deal with every case very speedily. But the solution to that is to go to these internet companies, which are powerful companies, which have a lot of lobbyists in Brussels to prevent precisely that. But the state and government should say, you have a responsibility. We are allowing you to make a lot of money with our customers and our citizens. You have to actually be responsible and take care of the content of your platforms.
Rabbi Baker, indeed, all of these platforms, whether they're Facebook, Twitter, other social media platforms, have vowed repeatedly to tackle anti-Semitic content. But Peter is saying, well, the volume is one problem, but also the lack of action sometimes. What would you like to see there? Where perhaps can governments, can leaders like yourself pressure these platforms to do a better job?
You know, I think we've recognized that the essential marketing element of these platforms is really built on making people angry. I mean, that's what keeps them focused. And so at times it's hard not to despair that the very business of these social media companies really runs right against what matters to us, what are our concerns. Obviously, there are other distinctions, certainly between Europe and the US, where we don't have the kind of laws that are being implemented here in Europe. But the reality is we've seen how individuals find like-minded allies to support their doing some of the most horrendous things in real life. I mean, we've witnessed in the United States only in the last weeks 2 horrific mass killings, mass shootings. One who sees social media as a way to even broadcast what he's doing. Another who gets radicalized from another mass killer acting halfway around the world. And I think that anti-Semitism finds an easy way to move as well on these platforms. I think the sad reality has become something we've learned, that what starts as words doesn't end as words, and we see what it can lead to.
Felix Klein, anti-Semitism traditionally and historically has been perpetrated by and associated with right-wing movements, right-wing thinking, but in your op-eds that Daniel has also mentioned here on stage for Die Welt, you've mentioned that we have to take a much closer look at the rise in both left-wing, but in your case primarily Muslim-motivated anti-Semitism in Europe. Some of it is being spurred by the Middle East conflict and refugees coming, Muslim refugees coming to Germany and Europe. Please elaborate.
Yeah, well, I think since I started my office, I followed a strategy that there is no harmless form of anti-Semitism. Every kind of anti-Semitism is a threat, and we have to fight every form. Doesn't matter whether it's from right-wing, left-wing, Israel-related or Shoah trivialization. So because if we start a discussion about how prioritize the different forms of anti-Semitism, then we don't get into a fruitful discussion. So that's the number one. And then what I said in my interview is that, of course, we also have to talk about this anti-Semitism emanating from Muslims without ideological problems. We have to name it as it is, and of course encourage the peaceful, the communities, the Muslim communities themselves to overcome it. And I'm really very pleased that many Muslim communities come up, contact me and ask me to join and help them. We have in Germany a particular problem because the Muslim community is very diverse. There is no such a thing like a central council of Muslims as we have a central council of Jews in Germany that speaks for everybody. We have a central council of Muslims, but it only represents a very small number, and the biggest number of Muslims in Germany go to Diyanet mosques that are run by the Turkish state, and there we have a problem. So, but still we have to address the issue, and we have to tackle it and punish anti-Semitism where it occurs, not only the extremes, of course, but also in the middle of society.
That is a topic, Armin Laschet, that I know you've been fighting for as former Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, which harbors probably the largest Turkish community, Muslim community in Germany. As former Prime Minister, I'm sure this is a subject matter that you've been discussing and taken up quite a bit, I imagine.
Yes. This with Diyanet and the Turkish religious authority, it's a very complicated question. Because when the guest workers came to Germany in 1961, everybody was happy that the Turkish state was organizing the services for people who are believers. Because in Germany there was no Muslim community. They came 1961 with the agreement with Turkey. At that time, this was a Kemalistic state, and religion and state were separated. And we have the problems in the last years in those cases when religion is used for political purpose. And this is with the new new, it's not a new one, it's 20 years governing presidency of President Erdogan. It became sometimes, after the coup d'etat, very complicated against Gülen and others. But in fact, the principle not to allow anti-Semitism in the synagogues is accepted. There are sometimes cases where you can say what happened there, but in principle is accepted. A lot of free Arab mosques are not organized. And this is the difference to the Turkish one, because the Turkish are organized by the state and you know who is who. This is a problem in some Arab communities, and therefore it's very difficult to identify what has to do with the conflict in the Middle East, what has to do with Israel, and what is really anti-Semitic, with the danger that it at the end comes to terroristic attacks. And we had even such cases in Germany. Yeah. So it's a very complicated question.
It is.
But the difference to France is the biggest Muslim community is Turkish in Germany. In France, it's Arab. And these are other problems with the French history, with colonization and all those issues. This is not the question in Germany.
Since we're in Munich, Peter Neumann, the notion and the phrase of imported anti-Semitism is coming up quite a bit, implying that, especially after 2015, 1 million refugees, over 1 million Syrian refugees came into this country. And if you will have perpetuated anti-Semitism, the problem here in this country, is there a correlation that you see, some studies that you can cite, or would you say this has no basis?
So I think I would distinguish. I wouldn't even call, with all respect to Daniel Höldgen, I wouldn't call it all imported, because Muslim communities are part of our societies. As Armin Laschet said, they've been here since 1961. We now have a fourth generation of Muslims in European societies. They are no longer importing anything. They are products of these societies. But it's true, 2015-16, a lot of Muslims came to Europe, and especially to Germany, who came from Syria, from Iraq. And through none of their fault, they were just not educated as part of European societies. And often in the societies where they came from, essentially, anti-Semitism or forms of anti-Semitism are part of the curriculum. So in terms of their normative orientation, they haven't had such a strong background. And I think a number of studies have shown that anti-Semitic prejudices are still, in some cases, quite strong. And this has been a challenge that all the countries that have received large numbers of refugees during that period have had to deal with. So in that case, for that particular population, you can actually speak about imported anti-Semitism.
Can I agree totally with Peter in the question? The word imported anti-Semitism is completely wrong, because it pictures the idea until 2015 there was no anti-Semitism in Germany, and the migrants brought anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is in Germany since 1945. Since the end of the war, we had 10%, 15% anti-Semitic people in Germany. And not the migrants brought the anti-Semitism to Germany. It was there, but then migrants came with another tradition, and they were as well anti-Semitic. But some people in Germany discuss it as the imported anti-Semitism, has nothing to do with the Germans, has nothing to do with right-wing groups. These are only migrants. This is wrong.
Since we're in the final stretches already of this very important debate, Rabbi, the question, of course, that we want to address and that we are addressing on this panel is, of course, how to secure Jewish communities around the world, and in Europe in particular, how to increase the protection of Jewish life in Europe. We're in Bavaria, we're in Munich. What is your message? What is your message to the German people, to the European societies? What do you, as Rabbi, as an American, want to see?
Well, I think we need to recognize we have a significant number of practical tools. governments can step forward. We have police training programs, the OSCE and others can offer that sensitize police to know what anti-Semitism is and to respond. We have the importance of collecting hate crime data. When people experience incidents or observe them, they should report them because those numbers will matter and they'll lead to a clear response, or they should in any case, from governments. And as I noted, Jewish communities themselves need to be alert and aware, and there are training for all of our congregations. So these are things that can be done. In my last remarks, I want to point out, I think we need to recognize, look, anti-Semitism has been part of European soil for centuries. And yet history does change, and situations can turn in surprising ways. I was, Ali, only 2 weeks ago in Berlin. I was there as part of the Jewish Claims Conference. We annually negotiate with the German government on behalf of Holocaust survivors. But on this occasion, I had lunch with 8 elderly Holocaust survivors from Ukraine. With the help of the German government and the Claims Conference, they were brought out of cities in eastern Ukraine. They're elderly. It meant for one or another 40 hours in an ambulance. A very complicated process. But when you think about this, when they were children in Ukraine, they fled the Germans, they fled the Nazis by going east into Russia and even further into the Soviet Union. And now here they are in the last years of their lives. They're fleeing the Russians. And where do they find safety and security? Here in Germany. So it's a remarkable irony of history, but I think it tells us how things can change, and also for the better.
A strange twist of, ironic twist of history there, undoubtedly. Before we wrap up, I want to give all you a final chance for some final remarks. Felix Klein, the situation is actually quite good. 2020 says Armin Laschet, you confirmed that, but we need to be vigilant, of course. What remains to be done? What remains to be done so that we don't, if you will, have to gather here once again and bring up the question of how to secure Jews in Europe?
Well, anyway, the existence of Jewish life in Germany in 2022 is a miracle. If you think of 1945, where we started, so we see a vibrant Jewish life that is more present in German streets. The initiative of 1,700 years has shown the Jewish community is much more open to invite other people to show themselves. So that's a great development. And at the same time, with the visibility, with the increased visibility, of course the danger is also coming. The threat is also increasing. So we have to ensure that we have that good development without of course, having attacks. So what I think is important, once again, is that we use the instruments that we have in a much more efficient way, that we also use much more the expertise of the Jewish communities themselves. So there are some länder in Germany where there's a regular exchange between the police and the security of the Jewish community themselves. So we have to enhance that communication, and at the same time, of course, increase the vigilance also of the general population. That is a very hard thing to do for politicians. I do not cease to tell people, look, anti-Semitism does not only challenge and threat Jews, but everybody. And this is, of course, a broader thing.
For sure. Peter Neumann.
Yes, I think it's very clear that there's one fundamental difference in comparison to the pre-war period, the Weimar Republic. Even though there was anti-Semitism in society then, there's anti-Semitism today. In contrast to that period, you now have, especially in Germany, the strong support from the state and the institutions. And you saw it from Markus Söder before. They're really 100% determined to support Jewish life in Germany and in Europe. That's the big difference. Now, the state, however, sometimes needs a little bit of help. And I think the most useful thing that Jewish communities could do in order to prompt politicians to pay more attention to this problem is to collect even more data. We still have a number of countries where anti-Semitic attacks are not being recorded systematically. We have a number of countries in which they are collected partially. We only have very few countries where you have a full picture, and you need that because Jews are minorities in every country. Mainstream society isn't always and every day paying attention to this problem. So you need this data in order to be able to go to political leaders and say, this is getting worse. Something needs to happen. It's not just about the big terrorist attack that kills dozens of people. It's about small incidents, however, which are very important and very damaging to Jewish communities because they can poison a whole community's life. A graffiti, someone attacking someone wearing a kippah, something like that. All of that needs to be recorded in order to impress upon political leaders that this is an important issue that constantly needs to be paid attention to.
We need to pay attention. Don't let up. This is a subject matter. We have to be vigilant. We have to be on top, says Peter Neumann correctly, of course. We started with you, Armin Laschet. We're going to end with you, your final remarks.
Yes, I agree. Peter described the situation very concrete. And it's, I think, important to say it's not only the terrorist attacks with dozen people who dies. If somebody has a religion and he's not able to show his religious symbol on the street and he is attacked or she is attacked by people on the street, this is the problem. This is the main problem of people living in this country. Terrorist attacks, sometimes, yes, you have an attack, but the day by day discrimination of Jews must be stopped. And that's what Markus Söder said for Bavaria is the same in North Rhine-Westphalia. We secure the synagogues and schools and kindergartens with a lot of money every year. We have a new state treaty since some weeks where we again, together with the Jewish community, are strengthening securing the buildings. But to secure the life of people on the street, this is a question for society, and this is what we are discussing every day together with our friends, because if you have an anti-Semitic society, it's usually a society which is discriminating in the next step other groups in the society, and therefore it's a question of living together in a multicultural society.
Securing Jewish life and tackling anti-Semitism is not a task of one group, not the task of politicians, of scientists, of representatives. It's a society. It's certainly what you're saying, Armin Laschet, and what has been echoed here throughout. It's the task of each and every one of us in Europe and beyond. Armin Laschet, Felix Klein, Rabbi Andrew Baker, and Peter Neumann, thank you so much for your remarks. This is your applause. Thank you so much. Thank you indeed. We are going to, I'm looking at, are we taking a break? Are we taking a 5-minute break? Okay. Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to take a 5-minute break and then continue right here with the award ceremony. We'll see you right back here. Thank you.